Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this wonderful conversation between Anna Smith and the amazing Sandy Powell. I'll just wait for a few moments for you all to get in. You're all very, very welcome. It's lovely to see so many people here this evening, albeit virtually. I can see you in my head. As I say, we'll just wait a moment and then I'll get started. Okay, while you're waiting, please do use the chat facility and just drop a line, say who you are, where you're watching from, and that would be lovely. And yes, you can raise your hand if you wish, by all means. And you can ask questions via the Q&A facility. I'll explain a little bit more about that in a moment. But yeah, everyone's coming in. It's great to see so many of you. Hello, Wendy Williams, who is a regular to our talks. And I'm thinking there are hopefully going to be lots of people from Bournemouth here this evening. And you're all very welcome too, as is everyone. Hi, Holly. Who else is out there, I wonder? Oh, Bella, John, Reading, and hello from the Netherlands, lovely. And more from Bournemouth. As I say, I'm hoping there'll be quite a few of you from Bournemouth, which would be rather nice. Good. Nearly there, very nearly there. Okay, Jane, in Shrivenham, yes, just down the road. Fish pie, very nice too. Bogner, hello. Hello, AUB student. Hello, Alice. Excellent. Well, I think we'll get started. There are lots of people from Bournemouth, and I'm so delighted. Right. Well, this is a second chance for some people to see this lovely conversation between Anna Smith and Sandy Powell. It was first broadcast back in August, and you kind of need to appreciate that to understand some of Sandy's comments later on about wearing costumes in the heat, etc. So do bear that in mind. As I say, you've got the chat facility there, so it would be lovely if you could use that, but certainly also use the Q&A. You'll see that there are some questions at the end from when we recorded this beforehand, so we'll listen to those. I'm more than happy to answer Blenheim-related questions. I can answer things on the history of Blenheim. I can even answer things on some of the history of the costumes at Blenheim, but I'm not a designer. So anyway, we'll get started. Welcome to you all, a special welcome to the AUB students, and let's hope you enjoy the evening, and I shall see you again shortly. Here we go.
And welcome to this very special virtual seminar for Blenheim Palace on the anniversary of the Battle of Blenheim, believe it or not. My name's Anna Smith. I'm a film critic, a BBC broadcaster. I'm host of the Girls on Film podcast, and I'm also chair of the London Film Critics Circle. It's my great pleasure to welcome today the costume designer Sandy Powell. Welcome.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
It's great to see you. I last saw you in January at the London Critics Circle Film Awards, where you were rightly awarded the Dilys Powell Award for Excellence in Cinema. It's good to see you again. You were wearing a suit that night to raise funds to save Derek Jarman's cottage. Tell us more about that suit and why that cause was important to you.
Oh, goodness. Well, the suit, oh, here we go, there's a picture of it. The suit started life as a toile, which is, for those who don't know, is actually the pattern for an outfit that was made for me for the Academy Awards and the BAFTAs last year. A friend of mine who's a tailor made me a couple of suits of BAFTAs and the Oscars, and this is what he fits. He makes it in a calico first and fitted it. This year round, in January, when I received nominations again, I was completely shocked. I didn't expect them. And the first thought that entered my head was, oh God, now I've got to think of something else to wear. and I didn't want to spend any money. I didn't want to spend any time doing it. And I thought, you know what? I mean, BAFTA's going on about sustainability. Everybody's going on about sustainability, and BAFTA are encouraging people to wear vintage or recycle. I thought, oh, okay, I'm really recycling. I'm going to wear the toile that was made for my suits last year. So that decision was made, that I was just going to wear a nice plain white suit, actually held together with safety pins instead of buttons. But that coincided with the campaign to raise money to save Derek Jarman's cottage in Dungeness. And it's not to save it from demolition or anything, but it was to save it being sold to somebody privately, and put it into trust so that it could be used by the general public. And really primarily, the idea is to make it work as a retreat for sort of artists, writers, composers, gardeners. I mean, you know, anybody who needs to get away for a few days, and also to sort of promote and prolong Derek's legacy. So 3.5 million needed to be raised, and this was organised by a charity called the Art Fund. And because I was close to Derek, myself and a few other close people were involved in trying to come up with ideas and ways to raise the money. And there are many different things that happened. But I suddenly had this idea that I'm wearing a completely blank canvas to the BAFTAs, and maybe I should get some signatures on it, and then maybe we could sell the suit. So that's pretty much what the plan was. Now, the London Critics Circle Awards came up just prior to the BAFTAs, and I thought, I'm going to debut it there. And having won the award for a lifetime achievement thing, of course, I was going to mention Derek Jarman, as Derek was, in fact, the first ever film director I ever worked with, and pretty much was responsible for sort of shaping how the rest of my career turned out. So I was obviously talking about him and his influence on me, and then I sort of said, well, you may notice that I'm wearing an unfinished suit here, and the plan is to, you know, start raising money by getting signatures. And so that's what I started that very first night. I got the first few signatures on it, and then it built up and built up and built up until by the end of the Academy Awards I had over 200.
And how much did you make for the cause?
Well, the suit itself sold in auction for 16,000, but according to the Art Fund, it actually raised hundreds of thousands just in the publicity it raised. It then attracted people to the website, and then it attracted people making donations to the funding part of it. So I think it did pretty well.
Tell us a little bit more about your early work with Derek and how you came to work with him.
Well, what happened was I left art school where I was studying theatre design. I actually left at the end of my second year. I mean, I in all truth, I decided to take a year off before completing my degree, because I'd actually met somebody called Lindsay Kemp, who was a dancer and a choreographer and a fantastic entertainer. I'd met him that summer, during the summer holidays at the end of my second year. And he was somebody whose work I'd seen as a teenager and had totally inspired me and had made me realize that there was a job to be had in the theatre, and that's where I started. Cut a long story short, I then went to art school to do theatre design, did a couple of years there, met him in the summer holidays. He said, come and work for me. So I thought, I'm going to take a year off and see if anything comes of it. And I actually did go to work for him in that year, and I never went back to college. So I did a couple of years working in theatre in London and in Italy and Spain, where Lindsay Kemp worked. And then I decided it was maybe time to move into a new field, and I was interested in film. And I'd seen Derek Jarman's work and loved it. And I just called him. I called him one day and said, come and see this show I've designed that's at the ICA Theatre, which he did. And he invited me to tea, and basically we became friends, and he introduced me to the world of film through music videos. We're talking early 80s. We're talking about 82, 83 here. And that's where I started. I started working in music videos with Derek for a year, and then after a year, in 1985, he gave me my first film, which was Caravaggio. That's how the story goes.
Yeah, amazing. Now we're going to talk about your work in some specific films that relate to Blenheim as well.
Yes, of course.
We start. I know that people watching will be interested to know more about how your job works. And rather than ask you specific questions, I wanted to say, are there any common myths or misconceptions regarding your job that you come up with? And would you like to put any of them straight?
Okay, the biggest myth is that it's glamorous.
Right, okay.
There's absolutely nothing glamorous about it. I mean, it looks like it's glamorous. I mean, it's glamorous in that, yes, we get to meet actors, but actors are people like the rest of us. It's not red carpets all the way. And when it is a red carpet, it's actually hard work. But that's fun. They're the little fun bits, but they're few and far between. The actual job, I mean, for example, 2 days ago, I was in Paris, which sounds glamorous, but I went at 6 o'clock in the morning and I got back home at 12 o'clock at night, and I spent 14 hours wearing a mask and 8 hours up a ladder 20 foot high in an unconditioned, air conditioned warehouse, pulling costumes. It's hard physical work. You're sweating buckets. It's a long day. That's the unglamorous side of it.
What was that for, may I ask?
It's for the film I'm working on now.
Are you allowed?
Yes, it's a film called Mothering Sunday, and it's based on a novel of the same name by Graham Swift. And it's a very small novel. It's a really great story. It's set in 1924, and I think it's one of the first films to be starting from scratch. There's a lot of films that closed down during lockdown that are now picking up where they left off, but this is one of the first to start from the very beginning. We start shooting in 5 weeks.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear the film industry is starting up again. So
it's exciting.
Yeah, and now, as mentioned, you made several films with a connection to Blenheim, and some have been filmed at Blenheim. One of those is The Young Victoria in 2009, which, of course, you won Best Costume Design at the Oscars. One of the things that struck me about that film is that it presented a very different idea of the kind of perhaps stereotypical idea a lot of us might have had of Queen Victoria prior to seeing that film. How did you sort of reflect that in the concept?
Well, I mean, the story, I mean, this is quite strange talking about something that's so long ago, because I mean, we're talking, I think we were actually making it in 2008, so we're talking 8 years ago, which is quite hard to remember all the details. But I mean, it's called The Young Victoria, obviously, so it was about her very, very young years. It starts probably when she's about 16. I mean, she was 17 when she came to the throne. And so it starts when she was 16. And so she was an extremely, extremely young woman. And how we sort of developed her look with her costumes was that prior to her becoming queen, she was living with her mother and brought up by her mother. And her mother was sort of controlling her in a way. And we had it so that her mother was keeping her young. So all the costumes that we had on her prior to the coronation were very girly. I mean, they were true for the period, you know, for that early Victorian period. Well, it's not even early Victorian then, because it wasn't Victorian then, because she wasn't come to the throne. But that period of the early 1800s, they were correct for the period, but they were sort of young, very young, girly, almost childlike costumes. And then once she becomes queen, she can make her own decisions, and her style changes, and it becomes actually very pared down, very sort of spare. And not as ornate and not as decorative. And I think it was about her sort of taking her role very seriously and taking her job seriously. But the idea was to show that she was a person as well. So you get these moments of her, you know, being silly and being funny, like any young woman, you know, messing around with her dog or whatever. You know, it's and Emily, of course, was amazing to work with, because she's a brilliant, you know, she's a good sport and she's great fun.
Fabulous, isn't she? Another one filmed at Blenheim is more recent, and that's Cinderella from 2015. What were the challenges for you with this one, and particularly perhaps updating what was previously an animation, well-known animation?
Well, I guess the biggest challenge was not to disappoint, you know, because there are so many expectations of a Disney film. Everybody knows the Cinderella story. I mean, and I hadn't actually seen the animated version. I did watch it when I started work on this, but it wasn't ingrained on I don't remember it. It wasn't ingrained on my brain, but of course I knew the story because everybody knows the Cinderella story. So you didn't want to disappoint. And I felt it was important to keep the essence of Disney, obviously, yet do a new version. So I suppose that's the challenge. I mean, the challenge is just to sort of try to create something new, yet with sort of echoes of the old.
And that iconic blue dress, absolutely stunning. And presumably underwear is extremely important with things like this. Do you work very closely in terms of what the whole outfit and what goes on underneath?
Well, underwear is important with every outfit, actually, even contemporary. I mean, basically, the underwear through the periods defines the silhouette. So anything, I mean, Cinderella wasn't set in any strict period, but it was sort of roundabout, you know, it was somewhere between the 18th and the 19th centuries, you know, kind of sort of that sort of once upon a time period. And the same with Victoria. I mean, the corsets basically define the period, define the shape, and then the corset shapes through history change, and then so do the shapes that one puts on top. So without the corset, this dress would not be the same thing. It would wrinkle up. It wouldn't move. It just wouldn't be the same shape. And the same with, you know, if you're doing the 1950s, if you were doing a film in the 1950s and using bras that we wear now, it would look completely wrong, because the bosom shape would be totally wrong. You know, now we have a sort of much more rounded natural shape, but then, I mean, within the bras, and then of course it was those ridiculous, you know, bullet shaped. That creates the correct silhouette for the period.
Now, The Favourite is another one that has a very strong connection with Blenheim. Of course, it looks at the relationship between Sarah, the first Duchess of Marlborough, with Queen Anne and Abigail. Now, of course, Sarah, who's played by Rachel Weisz in the film, oversaw the building of Blenheim Palace. And recently, there was an 18th century accounts book that was discovered, giving more insight into the Queen Anne story. How did you approach this in terms of perhaps particularly the costumes all round and the modern aspects, because I believe denim was used in the costumes for the staff, which I thought was a genius move, and it just looked perfect, but gave it that edgy aspect.
Yeah. Well, the reason, now let me explain. This was set in 1708, which is one of those very difficult sort of transitional periods. It's a period that really I discovered hadn't been done much in films recently at all. So what we do on a period film is you rely on costume houses where you rent costumes to get a lot of your costumes, mostly for the background, for the crowd. When you've got crowd scenes, you can't it's usually, you cannot possibly make all of those clothes because you don't have enough time. And you certainly don't have enough money, budget to do that. So you rent things. And I discovered that there was nothing really in this period apart from odd mix of things, that costumes that are very, very old, that have been altered, that they're all different colours. And I thought that is going to look like a hot mess inside the court. It's going to look really ugly. So I had to think of a way to make them, make all of the costumes for this one piece. Then again, we had the script, which, you know, once I read the script, it's about real people in a real place, in a real time, yet, you know, you'll remember from the dialogue, there's something very contemporary about the way the script is written, about the way that it was directed. I knew that this wasn't going to be a conventional period film, so I knew that we could be unconventional in the treatment of the costumes. So what we did was I adhered to the historical accuracy with the silhouettes. The silhouettes and the shapes were as much as we could, were accurate. And then I just used contemporary fabrics. And the reason I used contemporary fabrics was actually financial and practical. Right. I couldn't afford to use silks and satins and embroidered fabrics and bejeweled fabrics that would have been in the court. I couldn't afford that at all. So by reducing the color palette also, and I decided to actually keep everything to black and white and monochrome within the court, it sort of differentiated the courtiers from the outside world. It also, in a way, made searching for the fabrics a lot easier, because you were just limiting yourself to black and white. And most of the fabrics in the court are cotton. They're just cotton fabrics, extremely cheap, but made by incredibly clever cutters and seamstresses and tailors into gorgeous things. And then the denim, as you can see here in the picture, worn by the kitchen staff. I thought, well, okay, so all the courtiers, the upstairs people, are all in monochrome. What do I do? I've got to sort of keep the palette sort of similar. What do I do with downstairs? And I thought, you know, they're working people. Let's do a workwear. And again, the denim was all made out of recycled denim. It was the corsets were made from jeans that were bought in charity shops. and cut up and turned into corsets.
I love the thought that some people watching The Favourite may not have known that their own genes were on screen.
It's true. They might be. Yeah, that's fine. That's true. They might be. If they live in Slough, chances are.
Oh, okay, if you're watching in Slough, then that's very possible that you played a part in this. Brilliant. Do you often find that sort of practical considerations can have really creative results?
Absolutely. Like this is a case in point. Definitely. I mean, although you'll have a budget and you think this is just ridiculously low, I can't possibly do this. But you think, you can either say, okay, I can't do the job, I'm going, or you think, okay, this is a challenge, I'm going to see what I can do. And usually, of course, the jobs with the smallest budgets are the most interesting jobs. Quite often they're the interesting risk-taking stories or scripts or directors. They usually don't get the money, so they're the ones that you really do have to make an effort and figure out clever ways of doing it. And yes, it does, it pushes you to be creative and think outside the box, for want of a cliche.
We've had a question from one of the Blenheim guides, actually. And by the way, anyone watching, you're welcome to bring your questions. We have a few pre-existing ones that have been sent through. So this relates to The Favourite, which is why I wanted to lead in with this. So Jenny says, through existing portraits of Sarah, Duchess of Marlborough, we see a beautiful, honey, strawberry blonde coiffed woman. In the painting, usually in the green drawing room of her playing cards with Lady Fitzhardinge, we see a woman with her eye on all around her. She wears quite a low-cut bodice, as was the fashion, but it was a shock to the system seeing her in the highwayman's outfit in The Favourite. Did you have the knowledge that Sarah was a most trying and difficult woman, or did the script influence you? The costumes were brilliant and thought-provoking, she says.
I suppose what I actually did was I just worked to the script. Because although I know these characters and the story is based on real life, obviously there's a lot of artistic license that happens in a film. I mean, really, we're telling a story. It's not a documentary. If it was a drama documentary about the real people, then obviously we would be far more accurate. So this really, her wearing the men's shape coat, was just about storytelling.
Great, thank you.
That's kind of what happens. I mean, usually that's what I say is we're not making documentaries and we're not necessarily creating museum pieces in the costume. We're telling stories.
Well, I'm going back to a question that we had from Charlie, which kind of relates in a way to the film Orlando, which is another wonderful piece of work starring Tilda Swinton. It's got a time travel element. The question from Charlie is, if you could transport yourself back in time and wear the finest of costumes for that particular era, which century would you choose and why?
Gosh, that's a hard one. I mean, I would like to go back to any time as a fly on the wall. I'm not sure I'd like to go back and wear the clothes.
Right.
Not that comfortable. I mean, not that I'm saying that we make uncomfortable clothes. I mean, obviously, everybody gets used to everything. I don't know what I'd like to wear. It's an interesting question. I often get asked which period, when would I like to go back to? And any time would be absolutely fascinating if you could be invisible and if you weren't going to be any danger.
That's it. It's the worry of catching weird diseases in the past, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Well, you can get them now anyway. So.
Yeah, this is a current concern. But I suppose that relates to, I mean, I'm sure that you're open to any era really, but is there any particular one in terms of design that you relish?
Do you know what, in terms of when I work, I actually get involved in whatever period I'm doing. Even if when I start the job, I think, I'm not really that interested in 1830s. I thought I wasn't interested in 1830s until I did Young Victoria. And then you find, as soon as you start doing research, and as soon as you start looking, and as soon as you start making, you find more and more fascinating things, and you get more and more ideas. And always, quite often, at the end of a film, I'm ready to start again on another one in the same period because I've learned so much. And it sort of takes you to the end of a film to really understand the period and get to know it. And you're sort of ready to start again with all the ideas that you couldn't actually get done in the job you've just finished.
So it's in a way quite nice repeating a period with a new film because you get
definitely, because it's never the same. It's never the same thing. And of course, you're dressing characters. On the whole, you're dressing characters, and And the costumes they're not necessarily about replicating a costume from a painting. It's about what that character would be wearing, or what do the clothes say about that character, or what do the clothes tell the audience about that character. That's the bit that I find fascinating, really.
Well, we've had a question from Rowan in Derbyshire saying, what happens to the costumes that you make after they're worn on a movie? That's, I'm sure, a common question for you.
Yeah, it's a very common question. And it's one close to my heart, because I get very possessive. I think like they're all my children. You know, I hate seeing them go, and I hate seeing them go to other places. But what happens very often is they get sold. And they get sold mostly to costume companies, costume houses, who then rent them out to other productions. And that's what happens. Big companies like Disney archive everything. They keep every single thing, and they have them stored somewhere. They have their own costume storage facilities, and they keep everything. I do try to keep one or two things from each production. I mean, they're technically not mine to keep, so I have to ask permission. But I have started archiving myself, so I've got a small collection of costumes from over the years, which I wish I'd started that sooner, because I don't have anything from way back, but I have a few things.
So what do you have? Can you tell us more? I'm intrigued.
Yes, I have a couple from Orlando. I have a couple from Caravaggio, actually. So I do go back. I've got a lot of Julianne Moore's costumes, because she used to have her costumes in her contract that she could actually keep her costumes. So she would actually say, yes, I'll have them all. Then she gave them to me, which was nice.
Fabulous.
I've got one or two from quite a few things. They're not necessarily the key things. I mean, I don't have, obviously, Quentin Crisp Queen Elizabeth. I mean, that is owned by a collector in New York, who and yes, and quite often they're sold to collectors. They're sort of sold online to collectors or auctioned. And I do know this particular collector in New York who's got a fantastic collection dating back to, he's got things from the golden era of the 20s and 30s, but he's got a few of my costumes. So I know where they are. I know they're being looked after.
If you need them, you know where they are.
Yeah.
I believe you've loaned some to Blenheim in the past.
Yes, I mean, I have quite a few from Young Victoria, and they've been exhibited at Blenheim. Yeah.
Fantastic. So we have another question. Did you have the chance to see John Bloomfield's inventive and clever costumes for the BBC 1970 series, The Six Wives of Henry VIII?
Yes, I did, and I was a teenager then.
Nice,
but what I remember more than I must have seen the series, but I do remember seeing them in an exhibition, which I think Renee. Oh, I'm echoing. How do I? Is that better? Yeah, it is. Yeah. Yes, I saw the costumes at the V&A, and I do remember, and I've got this vague recollection of seeing them up close, and seeing things like curtain rings, and really ordinary, clever ways of doing the bejeweling and the decoration, and that stayed with me. And when I was doing Caravaggio, I do remember when I was doing Caravaggio, which was my first film, we did the Caravaggio wasn't set in the 17th century. It was set sort of in some sort of weird 20th century period. Sort of a timeless period is what Derek's films always were. But we had one scene that was like a fancy dress party, which we sort of set in the 17th century. So that's the bit that people remember as being period costume. And we'd got some extras dressed, and these were just costumes that had been cobbled together, and I rented them and I made some, and I was making the costumes myself then as well. Wow. And we suddenly there wasn't a wig for a lady who had really short hair, and Derek said, well, we need to put something on her head, we need to make a headdress. So I ripped a big leg of mutton sleeve off one dress and stuck it on her head. Then it needed some jewels, and I used Quality Street. Quality Street wrappers for the jewels on the head. Yeah. And that was my inspiration from John Bloomfield's Henry VIII.
That's a great question. Yeah, they've mentioned the use of doilies and nuts and bolts for jewels. So yeah,
yes,
good reference.
I do remember that.
I'm going to have to watch that. I don't think I've seen that. So that's amazing. Now let's talk a little bit about the people that you work with, because there are some directors you've worked with multiple times. Scorsese, for example. I mean, what are the advantages of working with the same director multiple times? Do you have a kind of shorthand that you tend to sort of
fall into? Yes, obviously. I mean, if you've worked with the director more than once, then they trust you, and you know that they like you. And vice versa. I mean, you know them, you know the way that they work. And so there is a shorthand in that you don't have to ask so many questions. Although, of course, you do have to ask questions. You have to know exactly what's going on in their head in order to help them sort of create their vision, because that's what our job is. It's the sort of, we're working, as a designer, you're working for the director, and you're working with the actors to create characters.
And what about actors that you've worked with regularly? Are there any particular actors who you have found really engage with the costume process and really want to talk? I presume quite a lot want to talk to you about how their characters.
Yes, I mean, really, many actors want to talk about it. Of course, they do, because they are interested in their character. I mean, I actually don't design anything for the character until I've met the actor.
Really?
There are some occasions when that's impossible, when maybe an actor's coming from another country and you don't get to see them to the very last minute. Then you'd have to have done something up front to try on them. But on the whole, I like to hear what they think about the character, and it's important to know what they feel comfortable with and it's a collaboration. It's a two-way thing, and it's much more interesting if you've got somebody to bounce ideas off. And again, it's one of those things, like, you could do something and then the actor isn't comfortable or doesn't like it, and initially you're kind of pissed off, like, oh God, I've just done all this work and now you don't like it. But again, it might force you to think of a better way of doing it. And yes, there are some actors that know about clothes more than other actors and are interested, and then there are other actors who say, look, you do your job, I'll just stand here, which is fine. I mean, it means you can just do your job, but I actually prefer the sort of feedback.
Right. Yeah, to have that. Well, what point do you tend to go on set, and how much are you present on the set of a movie? Does it really vary?
Yes, it does. I mean, I'm on set every time a new costume is established. So if it's the actor's first day on set, absolutely there. But even if the actor's been there 5 weeks, but we're doing a new scene with a different costume, I'm there every time the costume changes. Or if there's a big scene with extras, if there's something complicated going on in a scene, for instance, if there's something going on in the scene that involves the clothes within the action, like getting dressed, getting undressed, sex scenes, that sort of thing, it's quite important to be around, because you can make helpful suggestions, and you want to see what's going to happen to the clothes afterwards. You've got to, quite often, if it's a period that people aren't familiar with, you need to be there to guide them and help. So I'm there for that. I mean, I'm rarely on set from dawn till dusk, because I've usually got 1,000 other things to be doing. It's not like, you don't get to the first day of a shoot and all the costumes are finished, like in the theatre. It's not like, first night of the theatre, your job's finished. In film, you're carrying on, you're still designing, you're still making, you're still creating, you're still fitting. So it's a lot of moving around. You have to go to the set first thing in the morning, then you might have to leave and go back to the workroom to see how a costume's going on, then you might have to go somewhere else to fit another actor, then you might have to end up on the set at the end of the day because there's a new scene being established. So it's a lot of moving around. You're certainly not there for the whole of filming.
I'm curious with what you said about how people deal with costumes, whether they're putting them on or taking them off. Perhaps, in particular, the sex scene thing is interesting. Would it be a case of you sort of saying, well, in this period, they would have removed their stockings thus?
Absolutely, yeah. You have to say what people will do. I mean, I even get involved in telling people how to walk. I mean, you'd be amazed at how many, you put a woman, an actress in a corset and a gown, and they've never worn them before. They'll walk like they've got a pair of jeans on. I mean, because actually you're not restricted. Your legs aren't restricted in a big gown. So they might, or somebody in like a 1940s like tight-fitting skirt, and they're trying to do big strides, and you think, no, you've got to do little steps, little ladylike steps. Or men walking in heels. I mean, on The Favourite, Nicholas Hoult had never worn, anything like a heel, and he had like little, the men wore heeled shoes. They were sort of about 2-inch heels. He took some training as well.
How long did it take him to master that?
Oh, a while, but he enjoyed it. He was up for it. He was up for the challenge.
He was terrific in that, actually, really funny.
Yeah.
So we've had an interesting question here. Have you ever worked with an actress who became pregnant and you had to then accommodate her bump?
Yes, I have. And this happened with Julianne Moore on Far From Heaven, which was set in the early 1950s. And she was playing, as you may or may not know, a sort of 1950s sort of squeaky clean housewife. So one of those, you know, where the dresses were the tiny little waist and the big skirt. So at the beginning, I'd worked with Julianne before on The End of the Affair. And at the beginning of filming, right at the very beginning of prep, she said, oh, I just better let you know I'm pregnant, but I'm only 3 months and it's fine. And the last time I was pregnant, I didn't show till 6 months. I just didn't show. Well, not the same thing on a second pregnancy. So she actually started expanding. We made all the dresses and we started filming, and she was expanding as we went along. And again, it was a limited budget. So I could only make one of all the costumes. If you've got a big budget, you might accommodate that by making more than one dress and actually making the dresses bigger and bigger and sort of trying to create optical illusions. So there were lots of scenes, like there's a picture here where she's got her hands in front of herself. I mean, there was lots of sort of holding trays of food in front of herself. And we let the dresses out and out and out. And the belt, in the end, the belt was on like beyond the first, it was like the tip of the belt was like sticking through the buckle at the very end. She did expand, and that's what we had to do. I mean, she was a good sport. I had her in girdles for as long as was bearable, and then she couldn't bear it any longer, and we had to let her out. But it was challenging. It was actually very difficult because she actually got much bigger than she expected to.
I liked her confidence. Oh, I'm not going to get big at all.
I know. But because she was aware of it and Todd was aware of it, obviously they choreographed the camera angles to accommodate that. So it was more to do with that. And we just did what we could. I mean, I guess you could really, if you really studied the film, you'd notice that, you know, the dress might have started off. She might have been wearing a dress at the beginning of the pregnancy, at the beginning of the shoot.
Right.
And then later on in that same scene might have been shot a few weeks later, and you'll see the dress has got much tighter.
Right. Yeah. Interesting. I'm going to have to rewatch it with that in mind, because I hadn't noticed, and there are some films where I definitely have noticed.
Yeah.
An woman, but well done for disguising it in that, because I did not get that. Now we've had a question from Emma. It clearly wasn't a disadvantage not to complete a degree. What would you recommend to today's A-level cohort with an interest in costume?
Ooh, well, what would I recommend? Well, I suppose if you don't want to go to college or you can't get into college, that doesn't matter. But you could still go and learn. If you don't want to do, you don't have to do a degree course. I mean, there are other courses that you can do that are vocational that don't have to have a degree involved. And I don't really see why you have to have a degree. I mean, but you do need to learn. And I think number one, the most important thing is to know how to sew and know how to make things. You don't have to be the best costume maker in the world, but that's how I started. I made clothes for myself. Well, I made clothes for my dolls, first of all, when I was a kid. And I learned how to use a machine very early, because my mother used to make my clothes for me when I was a child. Like back in the 60s, everybody made their own clothes. So I used to watch her sew and use the machine. Then I got her to show me how to use the machine and follow patterns. So I did that from a very early age. So I knew that. And then what I did in the first year that I went to college, I did actually learn how to do historical pattern cutting a bit. And that was probably the most valuable thing I got from college. So I think definitely learn to sew, because if you don't, then it's much harder to communicate to the people who are making your costumes what you want, and it's much easier to see what's going wrong with a costume or what you need to change if you know how it's constructed. So I'd say that was really important. And secondly, just keep looking and reading and looking at stuff, and then actually start at the very bottom. I mean, you know, get in touch with people who are working and say, can I come and be a PA? You know, a trainee, and you start at the very bottom. And that might mean making tea, you know, it might mean making tea, doing some research, doing some photocopying, whatever. But you're in the environment where costume designing is happening and making and creating is happening. If you keep your eyes and ears open, then that's the way to learn.
I'm sure that applies to a lot of professions, and you're living proof of the knocking on doors thing, as you were saying earlier, that you just called up. You know, why not call up the people you want to work with? Brilliant. And now you mentioned obviously commissioning people to make things. How, I'm sure it varies from job to job, but how big would your team be for a typical studio movie, for example?
Oh, the studio, well, something like Cinderella or Mary Poppins. I mean, huge. I mean, if you count every single person, I mean, the people who are there's the crew, that's the shooting crew from your department that's on set. There are loads of people. If there are extras, which there always are, there's lots of people that look after, dress the extras, look after the extras, maintain the costumes. And then workrooms. I mean, quite often you have 2 full workrooms, and those workrooms could have like 4 or 5 tailors, cutters, you know, scores of seamstresses. So I think it can be anywhere between 80 and 100 people on a big film. On a small film, it could be 6.
Right.
You know.
Right. And in terms of,
it's very different. I mean, when you're on a huge film, you've got assistants, then your assistants have assistants, and so it's sort of, you know, it trickles down, it filters down. But I do make an effort to go and see every single person that's working for me. I might not know everybody's name. I do by the end of it, but it takes a while. But then on a smaller film, you've got half a dozen people, and you know exactly what everybody's doing, and we're all doing everything.
Are you all over every single outfit with each of the extras, or is that more done by other people on a big movie?
I see every single outfit. I see every single outfit before it hits the set, before it goes to the set. I work with the people who are doing the fittings on, you know, I make mood boards and give them reference images. Then during the fittings, they then, sometimes, I mean, quite often I'm there at the fittings and I do the fittings, but it might not be that I'm available, I'm off doing something else. But I definitely dip in and out of the fittings. So I have people who fit the extras to my specifications. And they're really creative, and that's a really great job, because they're having extras come in, they look at somebody and they decide what their character is, and they have to sort of fit them immediately with what's available. They then show me all the fitting photographs, and then if there are little things that I want to change, we can change it, or we change it on the day. And then on the day of shooting extras, they line them all up when they're all dressed and have had hair and makeup, and you do an inspection. And I'm always a bit embarrassed about that, because it's like a military inspection. The ADs make the extras all line up, and they all stand there sort of like nervously, and you literally have to walk along and inspect everyone. And then if something needs changing, you change it. But it's yeah, so I get to see every single costume that's on the film.
That's a wonderful picture now. It does sound slightly terrifying for those extras, but
yeah,
brilliant. Fascinating. Now we've got Judy with another question. What is your favourite location? Presumably one you filmed at or worked at.
Oh God, I don't know. That's really difficult.
Yeah.
Actually, I tell you where my favourite location was: Rome. We shot the whole of Gangs of New York in Rome.
Great.
And I have to say that was my favourite location.
And I don't suppose you had much time off to explore Rome during that?
Enough, yeah. So we were there a year. It was a massive production. So actually every weekend, yeah. I mean, it by the end of it, you know, we felt like we were part of Rome and we knew Rome. It was a great experience. It was hard work. It was hard as hell. But I mean, it was really made a lot easier by fabulous food every evening.
Yeah, oh gosh, that's the great thing about Italy. But tell me more about Gangs of New York, since you mentioned it. I mean, what an iconic movie, and what were the greatest joys and challenges of that?
The greatest challenge was, it was my first film with Martin Scorsese, who I didn't really know. And actually, for the first film with him, it was probably one of the biggest I've done with him. It was huge. So incredibly exciting, incredibly nerve-wracking. And I think what happened was, it was one of those films where the script was continuously changing. So you never really knew what was going to happen next. Suddenly there'd be a new scene added that had 200 extras in, that were going to shoot in 2 weeks' time. Do you know what I mean? You're constantly thinking on your feet and doing new things. Also, working in another country with a completely Italian crew. I had 3 or 4 of my regular crew from the UK came with me, but then it was Italian crew. That's always challenging, but of course it's, you know, they were a fantastic crew, and we learned a lot from them and they learned a lot from us. I think it was just the scale of it, and it just went on and on and on. But it was one of my, in retrospect, it's one of my most favourite film experiences.
Do you often watch films like that back?
No, not really. And sometimes I think I should. The only time I see them is if they happen to be on TV. And I, you know, sometimes when you're flicking through channels and you see, you know, and I see, oh, I recognise that. Oh, it's mine. And then I sort of stand there watching it for a bit, and then I end up sitting down and watching. I never go and get the DVD off the shelf and play it. And sometimes I wish I should. Sometimes. because it's always quite nice, because you always see something different. Quite often years later, you can actually see the work that you did. When you first watch a film, having worked on it, you're incredibly critical.
Right.
You know, I just see all the things that I don't like and all the mistakes and all the things that could be better. And then when I watch them years later, I'm sort of quite impressed. I think, oh, okay, that wasn't bad. That was quite good.
That's quite a nice moment then, isn't it? You're
Yeah.
able to be more objective, I suppose. Now tell me more about accessories, because I'm sure that's very closely connected. How much are they part of your brief, and how would you tend to source them?
Well, if you mean jewelry, do you mean jewelry, glasses, hats, all of that? It's all part of the same costume. I mean, again, it depends. I mean, depending on what the jewelry is, depending on what the period is. If it's a period like the 18th or 19th century, obviously, of 18th century or earlier, we're not going to be able to buy those or find them. You go to prop makers and jewelry makers who specialize in doing that and design that and have that made. If it's more recent, if it's 20th century or even 19th century, it's possible to buy or rent. There are companies that rent jewelry in the same way as they rent costumes, and the same with glasses, and the same with bags, handbags, shoes and hats. You either have them made or you rent them.
And how much, I presume you're very, very closely involved with the hair and makeup department, but what kind of films do you find yourself particularly engaging with them and having a conversation?
All of them, actually. I mean, I don't do much contemporary at all. And in fact, I can't remember the last time I did a contemporary film. So, but that's not to say I wouldn't be involved, because I think the hair, it's very important what happens on the head, that actually goes with the person that's wearing the clothes. You know,
right.
Sometimes you see things where you know that the costume designer and the hair and makeup designer haven't communicated or haven't got on when they're when it's like the head looks like it belongs to somebody else's body, you know. So it's crucial. And actually it's the hairdressers that put the hats on the heads. We provide the hats, and then the hairdressers actually have to put the hats or the bonnets or the headdresses, whatever they are. And so they have to know about, they have to see the hat in advance and know, because quite often in a lot of periods, including, you know, the young Victoria, the hairstyles were designed to work with the hats. You know, if you or I put a Victorian bonnet on now, we'd look really stupid, you know, because I wouldn't have any hair and your hair would be coming out the bottom and it wouldn't work. Whereas the hair is designed to fill, you know, when the bonnets have a long bit at the back, there's hair that goes in that. The hair is shaped up like that to go into the bonnet. So you absolutely have to collaborate.
Well, we have another question from Judy, who may be a tricky one. It says, dare I ask, which was the worst experience for you from a working point of view? You may not wish to specify.
Yeah, you see, I won't be able to tell you that.
You can't say the film. Can you give us an example?
Okay, things that have happened is when you've done something like forgotten the costume and they're ready to shoot and the costume is somewhere where it shouldn't be. I've done things like I've returned a costume to a rental company thinking we'd finished it, trying to wrap. Wrapping is when you tidy everything up at the end of the film and everything has to be sent back and cleared away. And it was a film that was shooting very close to Christmas. And so we were all thinking about, it's nearly over, it's Christmas. And we were sort of trying to wrap up and finish. And I sent the costume back to the costume house where it belonged a few days before. And we were then shooting. We actually were still shooting that weekend. And then on the Friday evening, one of my assistants said, where was that costume? I can't find it anywhere. And I said, oh, it's back in the costume house, which was closed on a Friday evening and we were shooting on the Saturday. It got solved, but it got solved at sort of 5 o'clock in the morning the next morning with somebody having to open up the costume house, me having to go into the costume house and try and find the costume that had been sent back to the returns department. That was bad.
Not much.
But that was about my own unprofessionalism. It wasn't a terrible time because of, you know, outside circumstances. That was my fault. But I'm sure there have been difficult and stressful times. But you know what? We forget the difficult times. You know, there are always nightmares. There are always obstacles to overcome, and you forget the painful bits, you just remember the good bits. So I'm sure there are things, and I'm sure there are more stories that really, you know, I could tell but can't.
You're very diplomatic, may I say. We have another question from a viewer. Bearing in mind what you do, did you visit the V&A Dior exhibition, and will you be going to the bags exhibition?
Which one? The Dürer?
Dior, the Christian Dior
Oh, the
exhibition.
Dior, of course I did, yes. Yes, I did. Of course I saw it, and I wished I could have seen it more than once. I mean, exhibitions on that scale, you know, you need to see over and over. And I always wish there was no one else there when I'm looking at it either. I mean, you know, it's fantastic that these exhibitions are so popular and people go, but I find it really annoying when you're queuing up to actually have a look at something, and then you're looking at it and then you feel guilty that you're spending so much time looking at it. So I'd like the opportunity to have private viewings all the time, but and go back.
You can come up.
But yeah, the deal was fantastic. And what was the next part of the question? Am I going to see what?
They're doing a bags exhibition, apparently. Handbags.
So which one? A what? I missed that.
Bags.
Oh, really?
Bags. Yeah, according to our viewers. So that sounds.
Of course, I'd love to. If I'm in the country, I mean, I think I will be in the country over the next year, because I mean, I've spent an awful lot of time out of the country. The last 5 or 6 years, I've worked a lot in America, so I've been missing quite a lot going on here. So it's actually been great to have the opportunity to be, I mean, although everything's been closed for the last 5 months, it's been great to sort of reconnect with London.
We've got time for maybe one more question from the viewers, so get them in fast if you want to ask a question. But you mentioned what you had coming up in one instance, but is there anything else coming up that we can look forward to?
There's a film coming out. I think it'll be out later this year. The last film I did, which we finished shooting last year, was called The Glorias, and it's a film about Gloria Steinem that's directed by Julie Taymar, and it stars Julianne Moore and Alicia Vikander both playing Gloria Steinem at different parts in her life, and about the women's movement during the 1970s mostly. But it's actually about her whole life. It does go back to her childhood, but then really focuses on the 70s.
Well, I'm totally sold on that. Can you tell us more about the costumes and what you had to?
Well,
really
that was actually a very challenging one, because it covered 5 decades. It starts in the 1940s when she was a girl, and it actually does go right up to the present day. And the real Gloria Steinem is in it in the last scenes, which is fantastic. And it was an extremely low budget, and to actually do all of those different decades is quite hard. So it's actually finding all of those things. And then one of the challenging things is that you rent all these costumes, and costumes from the 60s and the 70s, they're all original costumes. And what you discover is that people have changed shape so considerably since, you know, decades earlier, that nobody fits into. No, 21st century people, or very few, fit into clothes from the 60s and 70s. So it's very hard. That's actually hard, finding the people to fit them. And then if we can't find the people to fit the clothes, we then have to somehow make the clothes to fit the people, but without much money. So that was incredibly challenging, doing 5 decades.
So presumably you get very involved with casting calls for extras of a certain size.
Well, yes, but you can't really do that. I mean, you know, we try to say we can, you know, we need to have different size people across the board. Obviously you actually can't specify certain sizes. We do try to say, I mean, we're doing a film now set in the 1920s, and we do have to say, look, we can't have people over 6, we can't have really, really tall women, because the clothes just aren't going to go on them, you know. And the same for the men, I mean, and also depending on the period, you can't have men that have been to the gym, you know. Right. There's that's a problem. It's people's shapes anyway have changed. Very few people have waists anymore. I mean, none of us have waists. You know, most people are straight up and down. So people are shocked when they have to squeeze into something that has a waist. And then people go to the gym. People are fit. So it's people with fit bodies are just as difficult as, you know, really tall people or big people. You know, it's all the muscles here and here are really difficult to get into period suits.
Imagine, yeah, because again, you know, I've seen some films which you definitely didn't work on where you noticed that specifically, and it's never.
Or when a gorgeous woman, you know, in a film like 19th century, and then she's in an evening gown and she's got arms that are completely muscly, you know, because she does yoga or goes to the gym, and you think she would not have muscly arms, but.
Yeah, no, I know exactly what you mean. Are there any other kind of rookie mistakes that you observe? Again, not naming any other films, but, you know, for people who wanted to get into this, what's an important thing to bear in mind and to try to avoid?
That's a difficult one off the top of my head. Trying to avoid. I mean, if you're trying to get into it, I mean, you're at the very beginning anyway, and you'll learn as you go along. I mean, I think, and you know, and we have to adapt. I mean, the fact is, there's going to come a time when we can't get people who are shaped like people in the 1920s. They're not. People are shaped like now. So what has to happen is we can't use original costumes anymore. I mean, it's very difficult using original 20s costumes because they're 100 years old, and so they're falling apart. Sometimes you get something that's in good enough condition to wear, but if you think of somebody wearing it for a week in weather like we're having now, you know, somebody on a set in this heat wearing a 1920s fragile dress, by the end of the week it's going to be in shreds. So you can't. So what we're going to have to do more and more is make every single costume, which is hard, and that's hard on budgets, but that's what will happen.
And in terms of commissioning things, tell us a little bit more about how that works in terms of you getting a vast array of costumes made. How many people would you have working on that specific side of it?
That totally depends on the scale of the film. I mean, sometimes, I mean, I like, wherever possible, if it's a big project, I like to actually have the workroom in my space. I mean, so I've actually got a workroom with cutting tables and tailors and seamsters. And I love that's my favorite place to be, actually. I love working with the cutters and draping the fabrics and actually watching them do it and seeing it as it goes along, because that's when I make changes, or that's when I can make adjustments. So I like being there. But then sometimes you haven't got that space, and so you have to send costumes out to people who have their own workspaces or individuals who make costumes. And that's, you know, that can work as well. But again, like working with a director you've already known, it's always good to work with costume makers that you know, because you know their style, they know what you like, and they can understand my drawings, which might be stick people to one person, but a costume maker I know understands what my drawing means.
Right. So there's a kind of shorthand there once again, with the people regularly. And our final question comes from Emma. I don't know if you can give a response, but she says, please, can I come and work for you?
Well, I'd like to say yes one day. I mean, at the moment, unfortunately, I've got a very, very small team and I have them all booked, but, you know.
But, you know, she's
keep asking, keep asking other people too.
Exactly. Before we wrap up, is there anything else you wanted to talk about or leave with us about the fabulous world of costume design?
Oh, goodness, I don't know. I mean, I just think that, I think the only advice I can give to anybody who wants to go into this field is like I said before, it really helps to learn to sew, and just keep looking at things, and try to see real clothes. That's the thing. If you're interested in period clothing, it's looking at the real things. There's nothing like looking at the real thing. So as you say, go to exhibitions, go to the V&A, go to the costume museums, go to the museum in Bath. Just keep looking at stuff.
And go to Blenheim, of course, which is currently open for people
and go to Blenheim and look at the paintings, of course. I mean, obviously, you know, when you do research, I mean, that's what the first thing you look at is paintings or photographs of real people in the period. Now, the thing about portraiture, though, is that everybody's in their finest. And quite often the portraits have been, you know, tweaked. It's like, you know, it's like people sort of tweak their photographs now, isn't it? It's like, in a sense, the court portraitists were the same as, like, you know, they were photoshopping their paintings way back. I mean, Queen Elizabeth insisted that, you know, she was made to look more attractive than she was. And I'm sure they did the same with the clothes, you know, I'm sure they did the same with the clothes. So, you know, but I mean, you can, I mean, I think what you know for sure is that the cut is accurate.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's another reason it would be great for you to time travel and be a fly on the wall to just see. Wouldn't it?
Really... And I think we'd be surprised at how rough people look. I think people will look scruffy. I think hems will be, you know, dodgy. I think people walking around in real life will probably look a lot worse than they look in film.
Yeah.
Because they'll be a lot grubby, they'll be a lot dirtier, they'll be wearing the same things. Their clothes wouldn't be all beautifully steamed and ironed like the costume department do to clothes before they go onto a set, you know. It would be interesting. That's what I would like to do. See what people really look like and smelled like. They must have smelled.
That's brave of you. But thank you for making it look beautiful for us and fascinating and bringing all those characters over many years to life. It's such a pleasure to speak to you, Sandy. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was fun. Thanks.
Right. So I hope you enjoyed that. It was lovely to listen to it for a second time. What I must point out to you without further ado, although Anna said that we are open, we're not open. We were open at the time that that was recorded back in August, but sadly we're not. However, if you really want to have a look around Blenheim, if you go to our website, blenheimpalace.com, and look for the virtual events, we can do a fully interactive 3D tour of Blenheim, and I'll walk you around. So you can come, of course. Do join us next week. We have the lovely Hugo Vickers, who's going to be talking about his biography of Gladys Deacon, who was the second wife of the 9th Duke of Marlborough. A fascinating story. There's everything in there. There's romance, there's passion, there's a murder, there's all sorts of things, and it all relates to Blenheim, or most of it relates to Blenheim. So do come along. And if you're, as you clearly are, interested in film, at the beginning of March, on March the 3rd, I'm going to be talking about lights, camera, action. So some of the films that have been shot on location at Blenheim, so come and join me. And then the following week, on March the 10th, we're going to talk to a talent scout from Curtis Brown, and she's going to give us a real in-depth behind-the-scenes look at what goes on from the time she receives a film script through casting, the odd pitfall on the way, and then finally on the red carpet. So please, there's lots to see. Come to our website, and it would be marvelous to see you all. And thank you, everyone, and thanks for your lovely comments. It was fascinating, it was informative. I love the thought that you can go and look at a dress that's, 50, 60 years old, and because we've changed shape so much, there's absolutely no way we're going to get into it, or with some tweaking. But fantastic. And those of you that have submitted questions, there's one I can answer. It says, does Blenheim own any costumes? So we actually have a number of liveries. So some of the clothes worn by servants back in the 19th century, we have those are on display. But unfortunately, anything 18th century would have been unpicked material used to make other clothes, or it would have been left to other members of the family, because some of the fabrics were just so expensive, with silver thread, gold thread, etc. So there we are. And thank you all so much for your lovely comments, and thank you for joining me. Good night, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Okay, bye-bye.